Ancient mystical sites around the world seemingly have the power to harness energy. Menhirs are a large man-made upright stone, typically dating back to the European Middle Bronze Age. These stones are able to harness energy coming up out of the earth and ripple out into the surrounding countryside in expanding circles, and that energy, as we're going to see, actually has positive benefits for people's health, as well as harnessing energy that expands the consciousness and help become more evolved, more intelligent, and more psychic. The ancients created a phenomenal feat that they would actually be able to take these giant stones and get them to stand up just with the equipment that was supposedly available to them at that time. This is a stunning accomplishment. Dolmens are very much like spiritual cellars, where you have stones built into a room. Often found throughout France, Scotland, Ireland, and England, the purpose of these were locations where our ancient ancestors would go inside to conduct forms of meditation. They are assumed to capture energy from the earth, which is then concentrated in the center of these areas. Some who have visited these type of locations claim on occasion that they have received a mysterious blast of energy. How these dolmens were created is somewhat of a mystery, especially how some of these huge stones were lifted, as the weight of some of these are tremendous. These stones also have managed to stay in their positions for thousands of years, never falling or moving regardless of earthquakes and storms. Some dolmens are much more organized, where they actually have breathing holes. There are many of these cosmic energy chambers throughout Europe, which when looked at remind us how our ancestors were far more in tune with the planet and energies. There are also barrows which are situated throughout America and England. They can be somewhat deceiving, as they look often just like large earth-covered mounds, some of which are very large. It doesn't look like much except just a big round dome. Most have entrances allowing you to venture inside to a large circular room. Again, meditation carried out inside these rooms sometimes provides a blast of energy. For those who have experienced this, they often describe the feeling as some form of sudden spiritual lifting.
Research carried out at these locations have revealed that some of them have been designed as resonant chambers. Most are specifically tuned to 110 or 111 Hz, both of which are known to us as healing frequencies and can produce accelerated healing properties, as well as developing your consciousness. 110 Hz is known to represent the human pitch. Buddhist and Hindu chant their mantras is exactly in the same frequency. Stone rooms in ancient temples in Malta were found to match the same pattern resonance, registering at the frequency of 111 Hz, or better known as the holy frequency.
Some barrows have been purposely designed to be elongated in shape, for which it has been speculated that they're tailored for the energy coming from the earth. Henges are probably the most recognized of all ancient European constructions, especially those of Stonehenge. Not surprisingly, there have been reports of strange energies coming out from these stones.
Bluestone is often used in henges. Seemingly, they have a strong connection with electrical impulses produced by the human body, and has particularly strong connections with the heart. It is said that the bluestone clears the heart center and strengthens the electrical workings of the heart. Sounds all very mystic, but there does seem to be some evidence to support that this is actually true. There are numerous scientific institutes that believe this. Investigations of some henges revealed a 7 to 10 Hz frequency field, which is close to what you might call the Schumann resonance. and once again, mysteriously beneficial to health and good well-being.
The evidence gathered by scientists over the last 20 years suggests that the ancient megalithic architects must have been acutely aware of the Earth's energies as well as the Earth's subtle geometries. This knowledge was integrated into the formation plans of their monuments, so to generate numerous forms of free energy. As an example, the energies passing from the ground upwards through these stones have been referred to as chakra bands. Larger areas of energy that surround complete henges as well as barrows have been referred to as a powerful circular earth pattern called a primary halo. These are natural upwellings of energies generated by the earth and often associated with natural underground water systems. A primary halo is highly magnetic and invariably consists of 3 concentric circles of energy. These locations were known to our ancestors as they were able to identify these places and construct standing stones and mounds upon them. This is the reason why the ancients chose a circular design for their stone circles, and mounds and sacred sites marked their location with the esoteric landscape.
Have you ever noticed that some ancient monuments appear to be connected? If you take a look at the world map and look at the positions of these ancient monuments, you'll notice that many are seemingly connected with straight lines, almost as if ancient builders used advanced forms of geometry. This is known as the Earth Energy Grid. The term ley itself comes from an Anglo-Saxon meaning cleared strips of land or clear strips of ground, or even meadows. But these lines we are referring to are energetic and exist whether the land is stripped of the ground or not. All lays meet as intersection points, forming a matrix of grid-type structures across the planet. These grid points, according to proponents, are the strongest power spots on Earth. Apparently, many of our ancestors thought that too. Somehow they knew this, since sacred sites such as henges, mounds and megaliths, pyramids, famous energy vortices, and even cathedrals are built on these locations directly on top of them. Nikola Tesla once said, "If you want to find secrets in the universe, think in the terms of energy, frequency and vibration."
Avebury is the largest stone circle in England and would have been magnificent in its day, but the Avebury construction was much larger than what we see today. In fact, the stone circle was the belly of a large serpent that stretched the landscape. It was constructed of hundreds of huge stones, many of which have in modern times fallen and been covered in earth, probably at a time of great disturbance such as earthquakes. The serpent construct was something revered all over the world, from the Native American serpent mounds to the serpent guards of India. No one really knows why our ancestors worshipped the serpent, but it was a practice carried out by hundreds of varied civilizations around the world and around the same time.
The 110 hertz, which you might find in Newgrange, for an example, in Ireland, which is an ancient chamber, or 111 hertz that you might find, for instance, in Malta, in the Hypogeum. These are healing frequencies, of course, but they do much more than that. In fact, these type of frequencies also help with consciousness. In some cases, people believe that it actually switches your thought process from your right side hemisphere of the brain to the left side, or allowing you to open up your sensories to the environment. It's very unusual what sound frequencies can do, but there is new research coming forward by Michael Tellinger and other researchers around the world, scientists even, which are producing very credible documentation about the evidence how frequencies can help heal us, even from severe illnesses. It's very clever how the ancients actually knew this. It's amazing. We don't know how they knew this and why they knew this, but they did, and they left their mark in stone for us to view today. There was some ancient secret knowledge associated to many of these sites, utilizing these natural frequencies or generated frequencies from producing an arm or certain chants within these structures. Very clever method. And even the structures themselves are tuned, just like the pyramids are tuned to certain frequencies. How they knew this is just amazing.
Silbury Hill, which is England's nearest thing to an ancient pyramid, is also somewhat of an anomaly. No one really knows for sure what purpose it had. It was once thought to be an observation platform that looked over the Serpent of Avebury. However, it has in more modern times been referred to as a ceremonial mound that once had a spiral path leading from the ground to its apex. There seems to be a triangular relationship between Silbury Hill and the Avebury Serpent. In these areas, the stones and the hill are built to focus energy at Silbury Hill and the circular Avebury Henge, which was once the centre of the Serpent, and that within the Avebury Henge were two smaller henges that would have signified that the Serpent had two items in its belly, maybe to represent birth or being consumed. There are large gatherings each year at such locations by those who believe these places hold special powers. Mystifying ancient sites are scattered all over the world. Many still lie undiscovered. Through the use of satellite mapping technology, we're now starting to find these long-lost civilizations.
Apart from using satellites in orbit to locate geological anomalies and ancient sites, they can also be used to map positive magnetics and gravitational anomalies. A number of ancient sites around the world reside in such locations, which are somehow connected to strange light phenomena and alleged portals to other realities. In some cases, it's seemingly possible to measure the effects of the environment left by the light phenomena, such as gravitational wells. These gravitational wells don't seem to last for very long though, usually lasting between 48 and 72 hours at most.
In an area of South Africa, about 150 miles inland west of the port of Maputo, this is what remains of a huge metropolis that measures, in conservative estimates, about 1,500 square miles. It's part of an even larger community that is about 10,000 square miles and appears to have been constructed from between 160 to 200,000 BC. The region is somewhat remote, and there are strange circular walls that have been encountered by local farmers who assumed they were made by some indigenous people in the past. But oddly, no one ever bothered to inquire about who could have made them or how old they were. This changed when researcher and author Michael Tillinger teamed up with Johann Hein, a local fireman and pilot who had been looking at these ruins from his years flying over the region. Hein had the unique advantage to see the number and extent of these strange stone foundations and knew that their significance was not being appreciated. The world has been taught that nothing of significance has ever come from southern Africa, that powerful civilizations all emerged in Sumeria and Egypt and other places. We are told that until the settlement of the Bantu people from the north, which was supposed to have started sometime in the 12th century AD, this part of the world was filled by hunter-gatherers, so-called bushmen, who didn't make any major contributions in technology or civilization. When explorers first encountered these ruins, they assumed that they were cattle corrals made by nomadic tribes like the Bantu people, as they moved south and settled the land from around the 13th century. There was no previous historical record of any older civilization capable of building such a densely populated community. Little effort was made to investigate the site because the scope of the ruins was not fully known. Over the past 20 years, a number of researchers have discovered that these stone structures are not what they seem to be. In fact, these are now believed to be the remains of ancient temples and astronomical observatories of lost ancient civilizations that stretch back for many thousands of years. These circular ruins are spread over a huge area. They can only truly be appreciated from the air or through modern satellite images. Many of them have almost completely eroded or have been covered by the movement of soil from farming and the weather. Some have survived well enough to reveal their great size, with some original walls standing almost 5 feet high and over a meter wide in places.
Researching regarding ancient stones and energies still continue to date. In fact, just this year at solstice in Ireland, there were several tests carried out at a resonant chamber, an ancient site, during the setting sun, and as it passed through and put the light through inside the chamber at that specific time, certain voltages were being emitted from the stones. Now, these type of tests have been carried out plentifully, but it has to be tied in with certain times and certain locations, it seems. Up to 300 millivolts has been recorded, enough to actually light small LEDs. It's fascinating where that energy must be coming from. We don't know. This is obviously some type of hidden energy that we're really starting to look into now and trying to grasp our understanding of it. Seems like the ancients had a very good understanding of it and were utilising it whenever they needed to. It's fascinating to see that that could actually affect people in those locations as well. They might even be unaware of those conditions. There have been people who have visited these sites many occasions and reported unusual senses, feeling unusual things, feeling energetic. Even things like such as equipment has fallen faulty in these locations at specific times. Could it be this mysterious energy that's affecting everything?
Looking at the entire metropolis, it becomes obvious that this was a well-planned community developed by a highly evolved civilization. The number of ancient gold mines suggests the reason for the community being in this location. Roads have been discovered that extend for hundreds of miles that connected the community and terraced agriculture, closely resembling those found in the Inca settlements in Peru. But one question begs for an answer. How could this be achieved by humans 200,000 years ago? Once the ruins were examined, the researchers were anxious to place the lost civilization into an historical perspective. The rocks were covered with a patina that looked very old, but there were no items sufficient for carbon-14 dating. It was then when a chance discovery revealed the age of the site and sent a chill down the spine of archaeologists and historians. The principal researcher of this location, Michael Tellinger, said, "When I was first introduced to the ancient stone ruins of southern Africa, I had no idea of the incredible discoveries we would make in the year or two that followed. The photographs, artifacts, and evidence we have accumulated points unquestionably to a lost and never-before-seen civilization that predates all others, not by just a few hundred years or a few thousand years, but many thousands of years."
There are a number of light frequency experiments taking place in ancient sites, which is part of a 5-year program known as Project Doorway. And that starts to look at the relationship between phenomena and ancient sites and the light frequency of terahertz, which is usually found within the setting sun or the rising sun frequency of light. Such tests may give answers why the ancients were associating their buildings to resonate a certain sound and allow light in a terahertz frequency to pass in. There is also speculation that the ingestion of certain properties like monatomic powder could actually cause a spiritual enlightenment or even a physical disappearance. These portals that people have been referring to. Some ancient sites seem to have a location in the middle and places where people could sit on the outside, which would produce the Om. And the frequency of the chamber itself bounces those signals back to the individual sat in the middle. Applying that sound frequency and applying the light frequency coming into the chamber at set times, such as solstices and equinoxes, could that actually open up some type of doorway? After all, scientists in Russia stipulated that during experiments they found that monatomic powder seems to disappear, or parts of it does, 43% in fact, under terahertz frequency light range, and came back once they removed the light source. So if we were ingesting monatomic powder, what would that mean? And would that 43% disappear? What effects would that have on the physiological and the psychological of that person? Do they face to another reality, or do they have some type of profound spiritual experience to the land of the gods and come back with knowledge? Who knows? But it seems that everything seems to be tied into a lot of these ancient sites. The resonance of sound, the resonance of light frequency, and of course the individuals which are in those chambers receiving whatever they might experience. It's quite profound.
These discoveries are so staggering that they will not be easily digested by the mainstream historical and archaeological fraternity, as we have already experienced. It will require a complete paradigm shift in how we view our human history. This area is significant for one striking thing: gold. The thousands of ancient gold mines discovered over the past 500 years points to a vanished civilization that lived and dug for gold in this part of the world for thousands of years, says Tellinger. And if this is in fact the cradle of humankind, we may be looking at the activities of the oldest civilization on Earth. Did gold play some role in the dense population that once lived here? The site is just about 150 miles from an excellent port where maritime trade could have helped to support such a large population. But remember, we're talking almost 200,000 years ago. The individual ruins mostly consist of stone circles. Most have been buried in the sand and are only observable by satellite or aircraft. Some have been exposed when the changing climate has blown the sand away, revealing the walls and foundations.
Why our ancient ancestors had such a fascination with gold is unknown. It has been speculated that ancient civilizations were somehow capable of melting gold or smelting, possibly even to the point of vaporizing it and creating monatomic powder, for which ancient godlike beings, kings and pharaohs allegedly consumed. So, could this have been why gold was mined in the ancient days, or was there some other reason for it?
Whilst continued mainstream study of such ancient sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is thought to be one of the oldest civilizations predating the Sumerians, work continues in South Africa, a discovery that predates Göbekli Tepe by thousands of years. However, mainstream science is simply ignoring the findings. If such a civilization existed at that time, we may just have to rewrite history, which of course can be a rather big pill for some to swallow. Tellinger has become a real-life Indiana Jones, making groundbreaking discoveries about advanced, vanished civilizations at the southern tip of Africa. His continued efforts and analytical scientific approach have produced stunning new evidence that will force us to rethink our origins and rewrite our history books. He is a major contribution to the field of ancient discovery and has been delivering the proof of the tools and artifacts that support his scientific findings. He discovered more than 10 million stone ruins that are not dwellings, but energy-generating devices. His Taurus stone, that crashed the TSA security systems at Doha International Airport in July 2013, has sparked the imagination of the global scientific fraternity in the quest for delivering a new free energy device to the people of the world. Attempting to find good, reliable information pertaining to ancient sites and discovered artifacts can be somewhat time-consuming. However, there are researchers dedicated to providing the facts, no matter the consequences. Ultimately, most of the time we find relevant and detailed information quickly being crushed or even removed from existence across the World Wide Web. One of the world's biggest mysteries, even now, involves the Great Pyramid of Giza. This monumental construction is still the topic of much debate, especially surrounding its origins.
One of the most intriguing discoveries in regards to the Egyptian pyramids is that a number of rooms inside are seemingly resonant chambers. And it is alleged that all large pyramids of Egypt resonate at the same frequency, even one that was seemingly incomplete. Some researchers believe that it was purposely left that way, as completing it would have changed its resonant frequency.
There are researchers that believe the pyramids predate the Egyptian culture and that the pyramids may have been adopted by the Egyptians. This theory is strengthened by the lack of evidence to support the idea that the Egyptians created them, especially when you learn that not a single Egyptian hieroglyph was ever found in the Great Pyramid, nor any existence to show that any pharaohs were buried within. For many scholars around the world, the magnificence of their construction still provides mystery and wonder. For example, the Great Pyramid is the only pyramid on our planet that has 8 sides and not 4. Each of the pyramid's 4 sides is precisely split from the apex to the base, with very subtle concave indentations. It's believed that this discovery was made by a British Air Force pilot called P. Groves in 1940, as he flew over the Great Pyramid in his light aircraft. Groves reportedly noticed the strange sight and took a photograph showing shadows that revealed the indentations. Some believe these subtle lines are only visible from above and at specific times such as dusk and dawn on the spring and autumn equinoxes. This leads some conspiracy theorists to think that the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids to, perhaps, communicate with heavenly beings from above. On the east side of the Cheops pyramid, numerous outside blocks have been removed, revealing the huge megalithic-type blocks underneath. These larger blocks would have gone unnoticed if the smaller blocks outside had not been removed. Even the visible outside blocks are of an impressive size, and in some cases provide shelter from the blistering heat of the day. It's estimated to comprise of some 2.5 million stone blocks, averaging 2.5 tons each, plus additional blocks weighing considerably more lying deep within the pyramid, where they serve special functions. How were all these huge stones moved? Even if we are to believe the textbooks and workers had somehow achieved the impossible and moved 10 blocks up on top of each other a day, the 2.5 million stone block construction would still have taken 664 years, meaning, if constructed for a pharaoh, they would have never seen its completion. A ridiculous hypothesis. There are also a number of surface blocks that are identical to those seen in Cusco, Peru. They consist of unusual shaped nodules protruding from them. It's been suggested by researchers that the nodules may have been used to help move the stone blocks. However, archaeologists say that they would have had no known purpose in aiding the moving of the blocks. Whatever the reason for their construction, the pre-Inca and Egyptians must have considered the manufacture of these nodules of great importance.
I've visited a number of these locations, and it's safe to say, when examining these stones closely, you cannot fit a piece of paper between them, even though no mortar was ever used. They are precisely cut and independently shaped to each other. Even the same amount of precision was applied to the back or inside of the stones, which you wouldn't normally see.
The stones of the Great Pyramid have been placed with organized precision. When examining the stones more closely, we can see that the precision cuts have been made as part of the overall construction. Today, many of the blocks are missing. However, the Great Pyramid would have had a number of further outside layers as well as a limestone covering. This would have given it a white coloring. It's even speculated that the pyramid apex would have been a solid piece of gold, making it a tremendous sight across the Egyptian landscape. Thanks to the use of specialist radiography equipment that uses cosmic rays to detect cavities in massive structures, scientists have discovered a considerably large, previously unknown opening within the Great Pyramid. The mysterious cavity could represent a hidden room with a cross-section of that of the Grand Gallery, the major corridor running through the pyramid, and is at least 100 feet long. As to what this room may hold is not yet known. Also, scientists believe that the shape of the pyramid focuses electromagnetic energy into the chambers, creating higher levels of energy. Research into ancient geopolymers has discovered through the use of chemical X-ray analysis that the casing stones of the Great Pyramid are synthetic in origin and that they have a lower density than any quarried stone. CAT scans of the stones show that there are hairs deeply embedded in the matrix of the stone. This is another clue that the pyramid blocks were cast using liquid stone. Interestingly, the report on the dating of these hairs was never released. Recent tests carried out at CiNENET in Peru provided some fascinating data that would suggest the huge stones may have been molded and scraped into shape. Legend speaks of a liquid derived from plants, which was known to the ancients to turn the stones soft. In fact, in 1983, a Catholic priest reported that he used the technique to achieve the stone softening. However, he was unable to figure out how to make the liquid stone hard again. While this theory is still considered speculative, there are marks on some of the stones at CiNENET that indicate that the stones were molded in some way. Unlike the scientific testing of these stones carried out at the Great Pyramid in Egypt, Peru authorities will not allow any official investigation to take place. Probably the oldest and mysterious pyramids in the world are those found in Krill, Peru, an amazing site that little is known about. Rarely are these pyramids visited. The sacred city of Krill was a large settlement in the Supe Valley, some 200 kilometers north of the Peru capital Lima, and a well-studied site of the Norte Chico civilization. Krill was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2009. The pyramids were not discovered until 1948 and are estimated to be around 5,000 years old. Now pillaged, they were covered in intricate carvings and again possessing precision-cut stones. Huge blocks of stone have also been cut and placed in burial mounds throughout Europe. Maeshowe is a Neolithic chambered cairn and passage grave located in the Orkney Islands. Like many other Neolithic chambers, the passageway is perfectly aligned with the midwinter solstice. Believed to have been built in 2800 BC, Maeshowe is the largest and most impressive of the chambered tombs found in Orkney and was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1999. The passage entrance to Maeshowe aligns perfectly with the morning sun of the midwinter solstice, allowing the sunlight to flood the chamber, revealing the true size of the huge blocks used. The construction within the center of the Neolithic chamber is magnificent. It is truly a work of art. Precision-cut stones have been carefully placed, even in the apex of the roof. No mortar is used, simply the stones are set in a way that they support one another.
Current research in regards to ancient sites that are not only aligned to the rising and setting sun at certain times of the year, but are also resonant chambers, which may have been used as doorways to other realities. Though it sounds like science fiction, it is interesting to point out that all references to these alleged portals are activated by a combination of sound and light. Recent tests on monatomic powder shows that around 43% disappears when applying a terahertz light frequency to it. As to where it goes, it's unknown. Scientists can only speculate that it is somehow phasing to another reality. What if ingesting large quantities of this powder assisted with transporting the consumer to the land of the gods? It's also interesting to point out that this terahertz frequency can also be found in the rising and the setting sun as it passes through and into these ancient chambers at certain times of the year. Chambers that were built to resonate at a certain sound frequency. So, could the ingestion of monatomic powder, the sound frequency and the light frequency be the code to passing from one reality to another?
Neolithic chambers found in Newgrange in Ireland also align with the winter solstice and contain intriguing megalithic blocks, some of which must weigh hundreds of tons, which again reveal their magnificence during the winter solstice when sunlight floods the chamber. Huge walls found in Italy also show precision-cut and placed stone blocks of stone. The Acropolis of Alatri is a good demonstration of an ancient fortress wall that houses the Acropolis. The center building has been precisely placed to align itself with the heavens. The masonry of Alatri is nearly identical to that of the famous polygonal walls of Greece and stands around 30 feet in height. The wall formed a defensive league against the Volsci and the Samnites around 550 BC. True polygonal masonry is a technique wherein the visible surfaces of the stone are dressed with straight sides or joints, giving the block the appearance of a polygon. Newer construction has been applied to the older walls, just as we see Cusco, Peru, whereas the ancient pre-Inca walls are much more superior and require no mortar to hold them together. The method of cutting huge blocks and placing them is an old-age mystery that defies explanation in modern times. Apart from the ancient and incredible method of key-locking stones together, we also find part of the blocks of stone vitrified, making important areas of the stone even stronger. This method can only be carried out by applying temperatures to the stone well beyond that of any traditional fire could create.
The method of key locking stones together was incredible, something we rarely even do now. This would have made the construction much more rigorous against shifting and earthquakes. Some researchers also believe they served another purpose. Though the keys are missing today, they would have been made of metal, which later was probably melted and reused by other civilizations. Could these metal keys be used to help pass energy through the rock to one another? Very, very possible. But how on earth could such knowledge have been known?
Some of the ancient walls throughout Peru consist of small pieces of stone as parts of its construction. Similar precision cuts are also found throughout the Egyptian walls, suggesting the method of cutting stone must have been relatively easy. The famous palace walls of Japan have also been fashioned in the same way, and in some cases even giant boulders have been precision cut into walls. Researchers and archaeologists are often stuck for words when it comes to complete buildings that have been cut out of the bedrock. These ancient temples have doorways, inner rooms and passages, all cut from as a single piece from the granite bedrock, some of which have long been abandoned. A lost history with so many unanswered questions. In some cases, whole cities have been carved out of the bedrock, leaving academics to wonder why and how these mysterious locations were created. Some buildings show exquisite carvings that have stood the test of time. Others have become popular tourist attractions, such as the Petra in Jordan, literally carved out of a mountainside that featured in an Indiana Jones movie. Though rather odd, numerous ancient sites around the world have amazing cut pieces of stone just scattered around on the ground, some of which are cut with so much precision that even now, thousands of years later, we have corners on them that are sharp. Mainstream archaeologists would have us believe all these constructions were created via the use of brass and copper tools, which in many cases are much softer than the rock they were used on. As an example, rose quartz crystal granite found in Egypt has a hardness level of 8 out of 10, and the tools to cut the stone only have a hardness of 3 out of 10. Something clearly does not add up. Apart from huge stones being cut, there is evidence of drill and bore holes, most of which show evidence of machine marks, as if something had turned and cut through the stone. The pentagonal boreholes of Massachusetts have been referred to as star holes. They consist of numerous shapes and sizes, often cut into granite stone. Why these shapes were cut remain a mystery, including the method that was used. These relatively new discoveries have baffled archaeologists. However, others, more precisionally cut, have been found in other countries, such as the star holes of Norway, which clearly show evidence of machine marks. It's unknown as to why these unusual marks appear in stone, often many hundreds of miles away from ancient sites. Some of the star holes in Norway consist of numerous shapes, just like those discovered in Massachusetts in the US. On close examination, you can see that a boring machine must have been used. The inner ridges are consistent of machine marks that rotated and cut through the rock almost a millimeter per revolution. Science is yet to find an explanation as to how this was done.
It's absolutely preposterous to think that our ancestors cut and shaped rock in the same manner we would do today by using power tools. But mainstream science simply cannot explain how this was done. As an example, there are a number of locations in Peru that look like they have been cut by machines, leaving unusual scoring marks in the rock. Even the process of liquefying rock, shaping and moulding, it seems impossible, yet there is now evidence to suggest this was actually being done. Boring holes into the strongest rocks in the world was seemingly easy for the ancients. Whatever they possessed to do these incredible feats, be it special tools and techniques, they remain hidden and lost to time.
The only feasible explanation of how ancient civilizations managed to cut rock so proficiently is the theory that they somehow knew how to soften the rock and also how to move them. The scholars of the world continue to tell us that these great feats were carried out by the use of brass and copper tools, when clearly it seems the truth of the matter is a guarded secret.
It would seem a lot of the ancient sites are associated with energies, or certainly sound frequencies. It's interesting to note that even throughout England, there are set buildings built in certain areas which seem to stand on lays, these powerful energy lines. But it isn't just energy we're actually talking about. We're talking about frequencies of sound as well. We have also a number of strange incidents, not just throughout the UK, but many places around the world, of strange humming sounds as well, coming from similar locations. In fact, when you actually do research, you'll find that a lot of ancient sites around the world are strategically built in key locations where energies, frequencies, natural sounds generate infrasonics or unusual sound frequencies in given areas. It's quite unusual that the ancients managed to know about this information and actually tied it into the construction of these megalithic buildings. In fact, some of these buildings are acutely built for sound frequencies. If we take numerous places like Roslin Chapel, for an example, in Scotland, is built in a specific manner that generates certain frequencies within inside the building. There are many of those places around the world, which, and some of them thousands upon thousands of years old. The ancients knew about sound frequencies and generating certain sounds at certain key locations and sometimes at certain times of the year, especially solstices. It would seem that the combination of light from the sun, sound, frequencies generated from ohms, even the India temples resonate at certain frequencies, and it is said that certain doors of certain temples in India can only be opened by a Gudra mantra. A Gudra mantra is a certain type of om and prayer that Indian priests many years ago used to produce, utilizing certain vocal cords which are probably not even in existence now in modern day humans. Apparently it took a whole lifetime to create and produce the Gudra mantra, whole amounts of years and years of practicing it, only to get it just right would allow certain doors to be opened to certain crypts and vaults within certain Indian temples. If this is true, then their knowledge of sound frequencies was tremendous, as it was in other ancient civilizations scattered around the world.
The Sphinx is the most debated ancient monument in the world. Having the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, it's not only beautiful and mysterious, but also was hidden for thousands of years beneath the sands of time. But what have we learned? What can we do to unravel this ancient mystery?
During the restoration process that spanned between 1920 and 1980, the lack of knowledge in handling limestone structure of that scale made some of the parts of the Sphinx to be in a worse condition than it was before. The reason for the damage was the use of gypsum, mortar and cement to fill in holes that were made by erosion. The modification built up new stresses in the limestone structure of the Sphinx. The archaeologists then had to repair damages made by the restoration process. They reversed the whole process by carefully removing the cement from the cracks and sealing it with something that is non-invasive. Also, there were a couple of areas of the Sphinx that still show colouring, due to it being painted in vivid bright colours by the ancients.
The Sphinx stands upon limestone bedrock at a height of around 20 meters. The head of the Sphinx alone measuring around 5 meters. It's often said that, in its moment of splendor, it was beautifully painted a sunburst red with a funeral-type headdress or nemes, which would have been vivid blue and yellow, much like the casket of Tutankhamun. The Sphinx measures approximately 58 meters in length with a 3-meter tail. According to official Egyptologists, it was sculpted in the 26th century BC, and with this, we have our first mystery. What is the true age of the Sphinx? If we accept the current theory of official Egyptologists, then the Sphinx is around 4,600 years old. This, of course, would make it older than the pyramids themselves. There is, of course, another theory that suggests the age of the pyramids are much older and fall in line with the dating of the Sphinx.
Although heavily influenced by Egyptian and later Mesopotamian mythology, the classical Greek depiction of a Sphinx consists of a body of a lion, a head of a woman, and the wings of a bird. Giza's male identifying landmark is technically an androsphinx. The Great Sphinx of Giza is such a marvellous piece of work that it's surprisingly nobody bothered to take credit for it. Even now, without definition and defining evidence of the statue's age, modern archaeologists are split over which ancient Egyptian pharaoh allegedly created the landmark. A number of findings suggest that the Sphinx was originally intended to be even greater accomplishment than what we see today. Archaeologists discovered large stone blocks, toolkits, and even lunchers, apparently just abandoned midway through the workday.
The Sphinx was first unearthed between 1816 and 1818 by a Genoese, a navy captain, Giovanni Battista Caviglia. He was the first to defend the idea that the face of the Sphinx belonged to Khephren himself as a living image of the solar divinity that Khephren represented. Initially, only the head protruded from the sand that was burying the body century after century. Before that, 4 centuries, the virtual travelers who visited the Sphinx only saw the great head of Khephren, just the 5 meters of it above ground. It took almost 2 years for Caviglia to dig the Sphinx from the sand as we see it today. During this time, the tip of the nose was already missing. The documentation suggesting that Napoleon Bonaparte's troops fired cannon shots at the Sphinx was inaccurate because the Grand Corso was a fervent admirer of Egyptian culture, and it's more than evident that, in the face of such an attack, he would not have been happy, thus would have never allowed such a thing to take place. It's more feasible to think that Bonaparte urged his troops to take care of and protect the monument instead of destroying it, warning them of the punishment of death. The missing nose was never located. The most forceful evidence was inadvertently provided by the Danish architect Frederick Louis Norden, who in 1737 made drawings of the Sphinx in which it can be seen that the nose tip was missing. Although it's true that Richard Pocock also drew the Sphinx at that time and did draw the Sphinx with a nose, the characteristics of the drawing show that Pocock was rather creative and not so objective. The most accepted story, although it's not definitive, points to Mohammed Sayyam al-Dar, who in 1378, annoyed by the devotion that the peasants showed towards the Sphinx, would have destroyed its nose and part of the ears, literally shaving parts off. This information was circulated by the 15th century historian al-Magrizi, adding that al-Dar was convicted and executed for vandalism. That is, the nose would have been lost in the 14th century.
The Great Pyramid of Giza is estimated to consist of 2,300,000 stone blocks that weigh anywhere between 30 tons and weighing up to 50 tons. What's more, the building of the Pyramid of Giza allegedly took place only in a couple of hundred years after the creation of Stonehenge, the construction of which remains equally mysterious despite the much smaller scale of Britain's most fabulous standing stones. For decades, various hypotheses have been put forward about how those clever Egyptians were able to accomplish their seemingly impossible task. Even today, scientists and scholars struggle to explain the method of construction. Standing at a height of 139 meters, the Great Pyramid must have been the most significant monument ever created on our planet.
Returning to the sensitive issue of the age of the pyramids, we already know that they too were partially buried until 1816, that the Egyptians supposedly painted them in a bright white color. When the Sphinx was eventually unearthed, it was discovered that there were strange marks on its body. These marks seemed to be wind erosion. However, according to researchers such as PhD in geology and geophysics Robert Schoch, the idea of wind erosion is absurd. If we look at the body and the legs of the Sphinx, They present horizontal and parallel, very deep marks. But it's not just that. Many of these marks are crossed by other verticals, often present in both rocks that are constantly subjected to a running water flow. That is to say, the marks were not caused by wind, but by water. Reviewing the history of Egypt, the only time there was water in the area is now covered in sand. According to the geology of the location, this puts the Sphinx at an age of 8,000 to 9,000 years. That is, unless the ancient Egyptians constantly bathed the Sphinx. If not, then this dating classes with the official age of 4,600 years. Every time we hear the word Sphinx, we often think of the same thing: the body of a lion, the head of a pharaoh. This is the classic image of a Sphinx, embedded in our memory for hundreds of years. We've seen this image in Egypt, in photographs, but is it a true perception? Is what we really see a Sphinx? Surprisingly, new research suggests the Sphinx has the body of a lion. If this is the case, and it's a lion lying down, we should see the lion in a position as we would normally see them, lying on one of its flanks, unless the builders of the Sphinx wanted to represent the lion in an upright position. In fact, if we look at man's best friend, the dog sitting next to us, we may have a better idea of what animal was being represented in the Sphinx. The Sphinx is likely not a lion, but a dog. However, what dog could be being represented as a god by the Egyptians? Well, only one, and not really a dog, but a jackal. Let's theorize. What if the Sphinx is in fact Anubis, the jackal god of the Egyptians? Now, why represent Anubis, supposedly with the head of Pharaoh Khephren? If we take a closer look at the Sphinx in all its dimensions, we will see that the body, 58 meters of it, is immense in relation to its head. A small head might mean that perhaps the pharaoh's head was sculpted from another, larger head. In fact, a jackal's head would be large enough to sculpt the pharaoh who, according to this theory, would have taken the gigantic sculpture of Anubis and would have turned his head into his own face. That is to say, the Sphinx would in reality be the largest Anubis sculpture in the world. Another question to arise is when you study the Sphinx. Researchers have for many years pondered the reasons why the Sphinx casts its eyes to the east. There are several hypotheses why this might be. First, we must clarify certain things. As we know, the year is divided into 12 zodiacal signs, which correspond to numerous constellations. 3 signs correspond to the spring equinox: Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. The following signs to the summer solstice: Cancer, Leo, and Virgo, followed by some of those of the autumn equinox: Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius, and the remaining belong to the winter solstice: Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. The relative positions of constellations vary very slowly with respect to a fixed point of observation of the Earth, due to some rocking movement of our planet in its solar orbit. Because of this balancing, our position in relation to the constellations change every 72 years, the equivalent of a degree of arc. In other words, it takes almost 26,000 years to turn the constellations and return to the starting point. This curious phenomenon, called precession of the equinoxes, was already known in antiquity, where ancient civilizations attached great importance. To each period of 2,160 years, they gave it the name era, and so it has continued to this day. If we multiply by 2,160 the number of eras from the current one to that of Virgo, we obtain an approximate date, the year 10,000 BC. It's thought that in those times, ancient people began to raise the enigmatic monument. So the Sphinx is likely not 4,600 years old, but closer to 12,000 years old, which would have been the age of Leo, as suggested by researcher and author Robert Bauval. There's a theory that the Sphinx is facing east because it's to recall a time, a remembrance to the civilization that once built it. To the east, we have several ancient civilizations, but none would be as old as the Sphinx. Only Göbekli Tepe in Turkey would be older than the Sphinx, around 11,500 years.
Predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years, Turkey's stunning Göbekli Tepe upends the conventional view of the rise of civilization. The thing is, Göbekli Tepe just doesn't make sense. The Neolithic archaeological ruins were first uncovered in the 1960s, but they significantly weren't realised until the 1994. Göbekli Tepe is so old and complex that it's rewriting the understanding of not just Turkish history, but the entire history of humanity. The construction at Göbekli Tepe dates back almost 12,000 years, placing it in a time period that is generally considered to be pre-civilization. It was built right around the same time as the last ice age ended. Göbekli Tepe then went on to be an active civilization for nearly 3 millennia before being abandoned under mysterious circumstances around 9,000 years ago. Everything we have learned about this location simply upsets the apple cart.
Can we perhaps find a relationship between the Sphinx and Göbekli Tepe? The Turkish temple has tall columns that represent various animals, but something more spectacular is that of the information from archaeologist and astronomer Giulio Magli. He believes this temple could have been built as an observatory and as a place of worship for the star Sirius. Sirius, also known as the Star of the Dog in the constellation Canis Major, is the brightest star in the sky and has been worshipped by numerous civilizations. Canis Major, Sirian, the Star of the Dog or the Dog Star, has also references within the Sphinx, as it has been considered to have the body of the jackal. Have we found perhaps the relationship, or is this pushing it a little bit too far, maybe looking for something that isn't really there? When you analyze the images carved in Göbekli Tepe temple rocks, we notice that the carvings of animals are rough and not to scale. Quite the opposite for the Sphinx. It's almost perfect in proportion. If we look closer, the Sphinx has its front legs very long, the hind legs somewhat longer, the back extremely straight. That is to say, beyond its mysterious beauty, the Sphinx has a certain disproportion that gives it an exotic beauty, and the reality is that we don't know what the Sphinx looked like when it was built, although this disproportion of which we speak is preserved. So it seems obvious that the Sphinx is not looking towards Göbekli Tepe because the temple is a good deal farther north from the view of the Sphinx. Of course, this is just another theory put forward by scholars, a theory that lacks any good evidence in its support. If the Sphinx is not looking towards Göbekli Tepe temple, then maybe the Sphinx doesn't look at a certain constellation either. It may just be facing the sunrise at the time of construction.
For at least 10,000 years, human beings have been plotting the movement of the stars, studying the heavens, constructing calendars and erecting monuments to track the procession of the constellations and heavenly bodies across the night sky. Many ancient cultures shared the belief that we came from the stars. Perhaps this is why so much time and effort and energy has been put into the study of celestial bodies, from ancient times right up to today. Several constellations and stars have played an important role in ancient mysteries and mythologies surrounding the celestial origins of our species. In the places where these legends emerge, we find structures that correlate with the position of these stars and constellations in the sky. What were our ancestors, our predecessors, trying to tell us with this information?
There are many ancient civilizations that aligned their temples and important buildings with the sunset and sunrise. This seems to be a widely growing hypothesis. However, if this is true, then once again it leaves a huge question mark on the accuracy of the dating of the Sphinx. This ancient wonder is, without a doubt, one of the greatest mysteries of Egypt and the world in general. Its age continues to be, without a doubt, a mystery in itself. And finally, as to who and why the head of the Sphinx was changed is lost to time. Debate continues if the head was originally that of a lion or a jackal, and if the Sphinx predates the pyramids. If so, then maybe the Egyptians adopted the Sphinx, leaving the question as to who created it, this being an even more perplexing mystery than many others.
Whoever built the Sphinx abandoned it very quickly. The evidence that has been found supports that people just put down tools and left and abandoned the whole place, just as many other civilizations have banned abandoned their locations, be it the Mayans, the Aztecs around the world. It's a mystery. We don't know where they went. We don't know why they suddenly left these places. But one thing is for sure, their skills in creating these huge megalithic structures, amazing, and are still amazing researchers today. They haven't got all the answers. Many researchers are guessing at this game. Who built the Sphinx? I don't know. How old is the Sphinx? Probably a lot older than what we really think, or what is documented in scientific journals. It's a complete mystery. Now in the 21st century, science is finding more and more things which do not give us any more answers, but produce more questions, in fact, especially regarding the mysterious cut stones of the Egyptian pyramid. One of the most interesting things that's come to light recently is that these strange cut stones seem to have shown blade marks, boring holes into granite stone with a cutting revolution of a millimetre per revolution, and obviously having to utilise some type of technology, some type of machinery. But where is that machinery? Where is this technology? Well, we don't seem to be able to find this. How did they do such things with rocks and stone? Obviously, it must have been relatively easy for them. We're just as perplexed today as we've always been. But most interesting is scientific study in the casing stones of the Egyptian pyramids over the last year. Researchers have taken samples from the rock and found that under the microscope hairs within the rock. And they couldn't work out, how does hair get inside the rock? Well, really, there's only one way that can happen, and that is if the rock was a mould, and whoever constructed it, whoever was over it brushing out those bubbles, hair fell off the head and into the mix. This has been speculated many times by scientists in places in Peru where rocks look to be moulded to each other in strange fashions and shapes. If that is the case, then we have to question, how did they melt the rock? Is there a method? There is rumours that they use some type of plant extract to melt rock, but there's no evidence to support those theories. We really are just scratching our heads. One thing is for sure, the evidence points towards that some of these rocks were liquefied and made like some type of hard cement. How they did that, I really do not know, but one thing is for sure, those hairs do exist within the rock, and if they're in there, there's only one way to get in there, and that is through the process of a molten rock and hair dropping into it, liquefied, and then eventually set in place. It's a complete conundrum.
The Dendera Temple complex, located about 37 miles off Luxor on the west bank of the River Nile, is one of the best preserved collections of ancient monuments in Egypt. Contained inside the complex is the superb Temple of Hathor, founded in 54 BC by Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII. On the walls of one of the crypts underneath this temple are a series of relief carvings sometimes known as the Dendera lamps, because of their resemblance to light bulbs. The vast Dendera temple complex covers an area of 430 square meters, 560 square feet, and is surrounded by a high mud brick enclosure wall. The complex belongs mainly to the Ptolemaic 305 to 30 BC and Roman 30 BC to AD 395 periods, though the buildings replaced much older temples on the same site. The Dendera complex contains a range of monuments including the Hathor Temple, a temple of the birth of Isis, a sacred lake, various chapels, Roman kiosks, and a Christian church. The earliest surviving building on the site is the Mamisi, a large granite shrine built by Nectanebo II, Egypt's last native pharaoh, who ruled from 360 BC to 343 BC. The main temple at Dendera is the magnificent Temple of Hathor, which in its present form was mostly constructed over a period of 30 years, from 54 to 20 BC, during the reign of Ptolemy XII and his daughter, the famous Queen Cleopatra VII. Along with the Ptolemaic Temple of Horus at Edfu, located about 68 miles south of Luxor, this temple is the most completely preserved in Egypt. On the temple's outer wall, there are finely carved reliefs showing both Cleopatra and her son by Julius Caesar, Caesarion, Ptolemy XV. The grand, elaborately decorated sandstone temple of Hathor was dedicated to the cow-headed goddess of Hathor, the consort of the falcon god Horus and goddess of love, motherhood, joy and music. The famous Dendera zodiac relief, the first known representation of these stars in the form of a zodiac in Egypt, was found in the temple of Hathor, adorning the ceiling of the second chapel of Osiris, one of the 6 rooftop chapels dedicated to the great Egyptian god of the underworld. Beneath the floors of Hathor's temple cult chambers are 14 crypts, suites of rooms of 3 or sometimes 4 stories. These subterranean rooms were used to store cult equipment, archives, and magical emblems for the temple's protection. The most important of the numerous statues kept in the crypt was that of the Ba of Hathor. The Ba was believed to be the being's personality and was depicted as a bird or a bird with a human head. Access to these crypts was gained from hidden trapdoors in the floor and secret sliding doors in the walls. Subterranean crypts were a common feature in Egyptian temples from the late period 664 to 525 BC onward. However, unlike crypts at other temples, 11 of those in the Hathor temple contain relief decoration. It is 3 of the relief carvings in the easternmost of the 5 crypts along the temple's southern side that have caused such a debate in fringe archaeology circles. One of these controversial reliefs shows Horus holding an elongated bulb-like object containing snakes, which is supposed to be a dyad pillar, a symbol resembling a column with a broad base and capital divided by 4 parallel bars with 2 human arms. A huge baboon-like demon holding 2 knives in his hands is depicted to the right. Although Egyptologists interpret these images as representing lotus flowers spawning a snake, some researchers have other explanations for their meaning. In their 1996 book, The Light of the Pharaohs, Austrian ancient monument theorists Peter Krasser and Reinhard Habeck conjectured that the snake inside the lotus flower represented light bulbs. They suggest that in the reliefs, the snake represents the electric current, the lotus flower the socket of the bulb, the lotus stem the cable, and the dyad pillar the isolator. Krasser and Habeck believe that due to the extreme darkness of the crypt, some form of light would have been required, and as there are apparently no traces of soot in the room, this must have been an electrical lighting system. No discussion of alternative explanations for ancient mysteries would be complete without an appearance by the granddaddy of ancient astronaut theories, Erich von Däniken. In his book, The Eyes of the Sphinx, the newest evidence of extraterrestrial contact in ancient Egypt, from 1996, von Däniken echoes the opinions of Krasser and Habeck that the Dendera reliefs illustrate an ancient electric light bulb, cryptically adding that the image of the baboon is a warning that the electrical device could be dangerous if used incorrectly. He also states in the book that the relief is located in a secret chamber. In 1981, Viennese electrical engineer Walter Gahn constructed a model based on the reliefs at the Temple of Hathor, complete with dyad column insulator, bulb and twisting wire, which did indeed function and emit light. So can we interpret these images at Dendera as proof that the ancient Egyptians used electricity to light their underground tombs and crypts, and were thus in possession of incredibly advanced technology thousands of years ago? The first basic objection to the theory that these ancient reliefs depict electrical lamps is that an electric light bulb does not need an extra insulator, the dyad. The glass of the light bulb insulates the filament. Secondly, no material evidence has ever been found, despite hundreds of years of investigations and excavations in Egypt, not a trace of associated artifacts or supporting technology such as wires or power supplies that would be required to manipulate electricity. Thirdly, the assertion made by Krasser and Habeck that no traces of soot have ever been found in Egypt's numerous underground tombs, pyramid shafts and crypts is completely untrue. Soot is there in abundance on the burial chamber walls of the Red Pyramid of Dashur, for example in other cases such as the walls of the passages in the Great Pyramid at Giza, for example. Decoration was undertaken in daylight before the ceiling and roof were installed. Furthermore, even a quick perusal of the Dendera reliefs shows that they are in fact covered in soot. The original white color of the limestone is still visible around the edges of the block. So how do we interpret these enigmatic reliefs? Although it is not known exactly what the Dyad pillar represents, its hieroglyphic meaning is enduring or stability and sometimes column. The Dyad pillar has also been interpreted as a combination of the four pillars that the Egyptians believed supported the four corners of the earth, as a cedar tree with lopped branches as the backbone of the god Osiris, and as a stylish sheaf of corn. It may have represented all of these things at various times during ancient Egyptian history. Many Egyptian pyramids and tombs display the Dyad symbol in their decoration, including Sneferu's step pyramid at Madium, 62 miles south of Cairo, with the Dyad pillars from columns supporting the sky, and in Diosa's step pyramid at Saqqara, where there are doorways surmounted with rows of Dyad pillars supporting an arch above. Rather than being an illustration of ancient Egyptian electricity, the scene in the Dendera reliefs is interpreted by Egyptologists as a depiction of a Dyad pillar and a lotus leaf and a flower giving birth to a sacred snake inside it, in accordance with Egyptian mythology. Admittedly, we cannot explain every detail in the Dendera reliefs. However, this doesn't mean that we have to ascribe to them fantastical interpretations, entirely without a shred of evidence to back them up. The electrical lamp theory seems to be based on nothing more than the carvings looking a bit like a modern light bulb, and therefore ancient Egyptians are assumed to have possessed electricity. People often see what they want to see in ancient art, projecting their own values, obsessions and meanings back onto ancient civilizations, far removed from us both in time and culture. One of the 21st century's main obsessions is with technology, which is why any ancient objects that are imperfectly or only partially understood are thought to be ancient machines of some kind that show that our ancestors were just as advanced as we are today. Unfortunately, this attitude tells us absolutely nothing about ancient cultures, buildings and artifacts, but everything about ourselves. The Dendera relief must be understood in terms of ancient Egyptian religion and mythology and not modern technology. The scenes depict a magical, not a technical process.
A chilling island in the southeastern Pacific Ocean at the southernmost point of what is referred to as the Polynesian Triangle lies Easter Island, one of the most mysterious locations on the planet. Don't even get me started on how many mysteries surround Easter Island. There are just so many. Also known as the navel of the world and located directly on an Earth energy line, many early explorers to the island had reported about the unusually shaped skulls and large bumps found on the back of their necks, which were found on the island. A number of highly detailed carvings have been found that depict these strange features, which are said to represent their ancient ancestors. The island is one of the most studied in the world and has been for quite some time. However, when it comes to revealing her secrets, she continues to keep a tight grasp upon them.
Situated in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, the enigmatic Easter Island has long been shrouded in mystery as one of the most remote inhabited islands on the globe. Though relatively small in size, only a little more than 63 square miles and housing less than 8,000 residents, the island is iconic the world over, most notably for its striking collection of gigantic statues, known as moai, which pepper the landscape. But Easter Island holds other fascinating puzzles as well, including beautiful petroglyphs and woodwork, a rich cultural mythology, and a purported written language that is yet to be deciphered.
Not only the island is said to be the location of strange phenomena, but also the surrounding waters. During the Kon-Tiki expedition in April of 1947, travelling to Polynesia, diary logs reported that faint illuminations were seen down in the water. Sometimes they were described as roundish or oval, or even triangular in shape, and would occasionally split into two parts, seen underneath them, travelling around in circular motions. And whatever the lights were, they were at least 5 fathoms in length. To you and me, that's around about 30 feet. The lights danced below the surface for around 4 hours, and occasionally the sea could be seen to boil and bubble. Probably the most fascinating entry in the log is the sighting of a big wheel that seemed to lift from the ocean and rotate in the air before descending once again into the depths. It seems the oceans in the area are notable hotbed for UFOs and USO sightings.
Easter Island, known as Isla de Pascua, and the Spanish and Rapa Nui to the native people, was thought to have first been settled in around 1200 CE, though this date could possibly be early as 300 CE. It was likely colonized initially by Polynesians, who traveled to the tiny landmass in canoes from the Gambier Islands, which lie 1,600 miles away, or perhaps the more distant Marquesas Islands, which are about 2,000 miles away. It is believed that the islands of Hawaii were settled at around the same time. The culture of the island seemed to thrive for approximately 5 centuries, as natives cleared land for farming and began constructing the massive stone monuments still extant on the island today. However, the small island's resources, particularly wood, soon began to become depleted, and a widespread rat infestation didn't help matters either. Some researchers have speculated that conditions on the island had become so dire that some inhabitants might have resorted to cannibalism. By the time the Europeans arrived in 1722, Easter Island's ecosystem was already in a precarious state, and over the next 150 years, the native population dwindled from approximately 3,000 individuals down to just 111 people in 1877. Diseases brought by the Europeans, for which natives had no immunity, was a major cause for the decline, as were slave raiding expeditions undertaken by the Peruvians in the 1860s, in which many islanders were captured or forced to flee to Tahiti. Easter Island was annexed by the nation of Chile in 1888, and in 1966 its inhabitants were given Chilean citizenship. In 1994, it was granted the status of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The early mythology of the Rapa Nui people primarily centered around worship of their ancestors. In their origin myth, Hautumatua, known as the king or supreme chief of Easter Island, arrived in a double-hulled canoe, landing on Anakina Beach with his party, and it was this initial group who served as the basis for the subsequent civilization. Hautumatua supposedly had many sons who ruled over varying clans on the island, and this extended family was said to have lived there for a millennium until the arrival in 1722 of the first European Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen. The famous moai statues, in fact, were constructed expressly for the purpose of defying the ancestors of the residents, as the Rapa Nui believed that those living on the island would have everything provided to them by the dead, provided they made offerings and worshipped their ancestors accordingly. As the resources on the island began to diminish, however, intertribal warfare resulted in the abandonment of the ancestor worship, as well as a halt to the production of the moai, and perhaps even the toppling of many of them, though it's not known if residents of the island, Europeans, or natural disasters were responsible for this. In place of the ancestor worship, a belief system slowly evolved, which focused on the veneration of Make-Make, a creator and fertility god whose cult was known as Tangata Manu, or the Birdman cult. This belief system persisted until the gradual conversion of most of the island's inhabitants to Catholicism in the late 19th century.
A strange spherical stone, much like the stone balls of Costa Rica, was discovered roughly at the centre point of Easter Island. It stands alone, one of a kind, with some unusual properties. The stone, named the Navel of the World, appears to be nothing more than a large spherical boulder, placed amongst a crude rock perimeter. However, the mysterious stone was believed to have been brought to the island specifically by the first king of Hatumatu. The name of the stone comes from the legend that it is the navel of the world, from which all life sprang, although this is more likely due to its perfect round shape. No matter the origin, the rock does display a few abnormal traits. For instance, when a compass is placed on top of the rock, it loses its direction completely, likely due to the magnetic elements in the rock itself, rather than more an ephemeral cause. There are now 4 stones around the rock, which were placed more recently and which represent the 4 sides of the compass. The connection to ancient sites and magnetic properties, there is plenty of evidence around the world. How did they know that they existed? Because they were specifically built on these locations where there are magnetic properties.
The most visible and well-known feature of Easter Island's landscape is a series of gigantic stone monoliths, construction of which was believed to have begun in around 1250 CE. The vast majority of the statues were thought to have originally been placed along the coastal perimeter of the island, facing inward towards its clans, as though watching over them. The exception to this rule are the 7 so-called Ahu Akivi, which experts surmise once faced outward towards the sea in order to aid travelers in locating the island. The stoic and dignified faces of the Moai, as previously mentioned, are believed to represent particularly revered people, such as rulers and important ancestors. In particular, the more recent Moai, who were carved with pukau or topknots on their heads, are believed to be chieftains.
A stunning archaeological discovery was made in May of 2012, where archaeologists excavated around the statues to discover the Easter Island heads have actually bodies deep within the ground. As with many things on Earth, time took its toll on the statues and buried them in sediment and rocks, hiding and preserving the torsos of the Easter Island heads. Why so much silt was deposited across the island is also highly debated, with some scholars stating that it was a huge tidal wave that must have covered the island, washing silt over the terrain and knocking over many of the statues. If this be correct, then this lends to speculations that it too was affected by some type of great flood on the earth, as we see evidence of this at many other ancient sites around the world.
Of the roughly 900 monoliths on the island, almost all are carved from the compressed volcanic ash known as tuff, a relatively soft rock. A few of the Moai were constructed from basalt, another few from trachyte, and some from red scoria. The statues were nearly all carved at the quarry known as Ranu Raraku, where almost 400 unfinished Moai can still be seen today. Completed statues were placed upon stone platforms called ahu. The construction of the monoliths must have been an expensive and time-consuming process, considering that the statue's average height is around 13 feet tall and average weight is approximately 14 tons. Not only that, but there is one completed Moai which stands 33 feet high and weighs 82 tons, and another incomplete one which could possibly have been as tall as 69 feet. To this day, it's still not known with any certainty how the islanders moved the massive monoliths from the quarry to their final place of installation. Modern researchers have attempted to replicate the methods they might have used, and have come to the conclusion that builders either rolled the statues to the coast using log rollers or wooden sledges, or more intriguingly, might have walked the statues as far as 14 miles across the island by utilizing a group of people who would encircle the moai with ropes and then rock the statue back and forth while also pulling forward. Many of the statues had already been toppled by island inhabitants or by earthquakes by the time the Europeans arrived in 1722, and by 1868 all of the moai had been knocked over. They remained in a state of disarray until 1955, when an American archaeologist by the name of William Malloy set about restoring and re-erecting many of the monoliths on Easter Island. Today, about 50 of the giant statues have been either placed upright or taken from the island to be displayed in museum collections.
One mysterious and unique statue of Easter Island is the kneeling moa, or better known as the Tukaturi. It's a particular figure that was discovered in 1955. This figure differs much from the other traditional statues on the island. Unlike the other stone heads, the Tukaturi's facial characteristics are more rounded, much more human-like when compared to the traditional straight rectangular heads of the other moai. The figure also has a beard and also well-defined legs, kneeling with its hands upon them. The Tukaturi remains an unsolved mystery because there are no satisfactory answers to some crucial questions regarding this curious figure. Why is this figure's location away from other sculptures? Why is it made from different material? And most of all, why is it so different than any other found on the island?
The moai aren't the only compelling work of cultural significance on Easter Island, however. In fact, the island boasts one of the most extensive collections of petroglyphs in Polynesia, with over 1,000 sites across the island containing more than 4,000 catalogued carvings. Petroglyphs were created for many different reasons. Experts believe that some of them may have been marked territory lines, been used as totems, or acted as memorials to particular individuals. The bulk of the petroglyphs can be found at the ceremonial center of Orongo, and most of this artwork depicts birdmen, a relic of the Tangata Manu culture. Other carvings illustrate animals, such as sea turtles, fertility symbols such as vulvas, and renderings of the creator god Make-Make. And although wood was fairly scarce on Easter Island, particularly after the landscape began to become drastically deforested in the 16th century, some beautiful examples of intricate wood carvings still survive. Some of these are crescent-shaped objects known as remiro, thought to have been used as decorative breastplates. These also sport carved heads on either top of the crescent. There are also clubs called moko mirau, carved representations of men with the heads of lizards. These were thought to have had ceremonial significance and were likely worn around the necks of dancers during feast celebrations. It is also believed that the moko mirau were protective totems placed in the ground outside the front door to protect the household. Lastly are the male and female fertility carvings, the moai, the kava, and the moai, pipi. These are fantastically detailed and grotesquely stylized, thought to represent ancestors, just as the stone moai did. Researchers maintain that these carvings were used for fertility rites and were sometimes worn around the necks of important men of the tribe.
New scientific evidence today leaves the world in shock, revealing what we were thinking, but no one dared to say it loud. The mysterious Moa statues of Easter Island were in fact built by extraterrestrials. I don't know about that. However, NASA scientists have allegedly worked in secret for many years on deciphering and decrypting the mysterious so-called Rongo tablets, and this ancient civilization left many of them behind. Wooden tablets were inscribed with symbols whose meaning was lost in 1862. By analysing linguistic patterns and occurrence frequencies of certain symbols, words and sounds, it was possible to break down the meaning of the symbols, starting with the most common. since the first Rongo Rongo tablet was brought to NASA laboratories by a Norwegian adventurer in 1986, the long and tedious process of deciphering these ancient symbols was finally becoming fruitful. The undeciphered tablets held hidden truths that will change the way we see the world today. They talk about how a civilization not of this world helped in making Momoa statues in their honour. Evidently, these wooden tablets were left as a testament to the world of their work. Apparently, one such tablet reads, "We came from above the sky to make the people of the navel build our living faces, to make the people of the world worship us." If this be true, this lost and forgotten language could reveal many secrets that have been lost to time.
Possibly the most alluring, if lesser known, conundrum surrounding Easter Island and its culture is the bizarre writing system known as Rongo Rongo. The name Rongo Rongo is the native language of the Rapa Nui, simply means to recite or chant out. First described in 1866 by a French missionary to Easter Island by the name of Eugene Araud, the series of inscriptions remains just as baffling today as it did in the 19th century. And to this day, experts aren't entirely sure whether the unknown glyphs represent an actual written language or not, though if they do, they would serve as one of the very few examples of the independent invention of writing in history. Approximately 24 objects bearing the mysterious glyphs were collected in the 19th century. Most of these were irregularly shaped wooden tablets, some formed from pieces of driftwood, and many had been burned or otherwise damaged. A handful of other items, such as the two aforementioned Remoro breastplates, one chieftain's staff, and a small statue of a birdman, also contain Rongo Rongo glyphs, as do a few of the stone petroglyph carvings on the island. The glyphs, or characters themselves, of which there are about 120 distinct designs, are approximately 1 centimeter high and are all outlined forms depicting plants, animals, humans, and geometric shapes. Some of the animal and human carvings have little protrusions on either side of their heads, which may represent eyes or horns. Due to the positioning of the characters, it's generally assumed that the text, if indeed it is text, is meant to be read in alternating lines, from left to right and bottom to top, rotating the tablet as one reads. This particular system is reverse Boustrophedon. Although in the original myths of the Rapa Nui, 67 tablets bearing the Rongo Rongo script were brought to the island by revered original settler Hautu Matua, limited carbon dating of the remaining tablets suggests that they are no older than perhaps the 13th century. Some of the tablets are known to be much newer than that, as they were carved on pieces of wood salvaged from European ores. Researchers disagree on whether Rongo Rongo is truly a written representation of the original Rapa Nui language, or if it is instead simply a proto-language, a sort of rebus puzzle-like system that presupposed knowledge of the specific ideograms in order to be read, or even recited from memory. The last known people thought to be familiar with the meaning of the glyphs died in the late 19th century, and in the ensuing years, the language of the Rapa Nui has become so intertwined with Tahitian that it may no longer be possible to reconstruct the content of the tablets. This hasn't stopped numerous people from trying to unravel the riddle, however. In around 1874, Tahitian Bishop Florentin Etienne Yosin claimed to have deciphered the script on 4 of the tablets, and after his death, the so-called Yosin list was published, which purported to describe the meanings of the relevant glyphs. Though this list was widely touted at the time, it doesn't seem to have been accurate, for no further translation was possible utilizing his findings. However, one breakthrough was made by William J. Thompson of the USS Mohican in 1886. He was able to deduce that one particular sequence of glyphs seemed to refer to 13 months, and from this, he and others were able to reconstruct this one segment of text as a sort of lunisolar calendar. To date, This is the only line of Rongo Rongo that has been tentatively translated, and others whose meanings seem decipherable also appear to be calendrical in nature.
Researchers such as Graham Hancock, author of the impressive book Fingerprints of the Gods, hypothesized that Easter Island is the top of a much larger island that became, towards the end of the glacial period some 10,000 years ago, a kind of beacon to other world navals. In fact, Hancock thinks a mythical lost ancient race built or helped at least build virtually all the world's impressive monuments of antiquity. Others think that Easter Island is a remnant of some type of lost continent. The ancient Rongo Rongo text continues to be deciphered. Many have attempted throughout the years bringing new information about this mysterious ancient civilization to light. But as to how accurate such interpretations are, remains questionable at best.
In more recent times, other linguists and epigraphers have had a crack at the mysterious glyphs, but none have come to producing a text that makes sense, and those that have are often criticized for their fanciful interpretations. It remains possible that the meaning of Rongo Rongo may continue to elude humanity for the foreseeable future.